Hello everyone, welcome back to this introductory series of Salesforce Commerce Cloud. In the last video, we talked about different components of a website in Salesforce Commerce Cloud being data and code. We also talked about some architectural optimizations done as part of the code. And then we talked about how data is managed in Salesforce Commerce Cloud in terms of system objects and custom objects. For this video, we'll be talking about the content part of a website. And when we talk about content for any e-commerce website, it can be further divided into either static content or dynamic content, or the content which is related to your products, like product images, product information, or when we are doing the checkout, there could be different modules and contents visible on during the checkout process as well. So basically, whatever we are seeing on a website can be considered as part of the content, but the way it is managed in Salesforce Commerce Cloud is within different modules. So just to understand what actually your content is, so as we know that the content is part of data and it has to be managed by business manager. And also the content is specific to a website. That's why it is part of your merchant tools. Otherwise it would have been part of the administration part. Now, how do we decide what kind of data is the static data, or what is the data which can be considered as a dynamic data? Now, to understand that, let's take a look at the website. If we go to the storefront, you'll see different sections. On the top, we can see this is a promotional banner. This is a hero banner, which basically tries to promote different products, or you can see it's basically promoting the seasonal products as well, spring new arrivals. In later sections, we'll see like this is a weekly deal section that we are seeing here, or this is again a promotional content. So basically the content which is time bound and changes frequently on a website can be considered as the dynamic content, because in order to make sure that you are promoting the right products, or you're providing the information about the correct promotions, you have to keep the content updated. That way it is part of the dynamic content. While on the other hand, if we talk about content which is more like most of the time it is the same, be it your privacy policies or about the contact us information, or in the footer if you see we have a copyright information on the websites as well. So that kind of content which mostly remains static and doesn't change that frequently, that is part of the static content. And as part of this video, we'll be covering only the static content part. The rest of the things we'll be considering when we'll be talking about different sections under merchant tools. Now, when we talk about the static content, the first section that we are seeing under the merchant tools, the content section, it is basically responsible for all the static data that we have on the website. Now, the static data could be in form of your images, videos, it could be in a textual format, or it could also be in a form of scripting files like your CSS or anything. Now, this content section basically comprises of multiple other sections like your libraries, folders, assets, import, experience, page designer. We'll be talking about every single section in this video. But before we move on to this specific content module, or for instance, if we talk about any other module, there's something which we need to understand is like, how do we know the flow of any specific functionality that we are trying to see or update or create on our own? So in order to do that, let's go to storefront, and if we go to, let's say, if any of the content page, let's say if we go to about us, now take a look at the URL. This URL is not very clear. It says about %20, so it's basically an encoded URL, and Salesforce out of the box, or we can say by default, generates URLs which are search engine optimized. So SEO friendly URLs are being created by Salesforce. But as a developer, we are not able to understand, and it doesn't make much of a sense for us to like what exactly is happening in the background. So in order to do that, let's go back to the business manager, click on merchant tools. Under the site preferences, we see this storefront URLs option. Now this is by default enabled, which generates your SEO friendly URLs. You just need to disable it and apply. And if we click on the storefront button again, here you can see, let's go back to the about us section. Now the URL is much more clear. So, and the way URLs are formed in Salesforce Commerce Cloud is, so basically it starts from here. It is like your sites, then the ID of the site that we are browsing. So here you can see it is site genesis. And so it's between your sites and sites. So sites hyphen the site ID, then site again. After that, after this slash, you can see this is basically the local information. We are browsing the website in English language for US local. So this is en underscore US is basically the local information. After that, we have the code information. So page is basically the name of the controller that this particular flow is hitting. And inside page, this show is a function. So like it's usually the controller hyphen function name. So show is the name of the function which is taking CID as an argument. So CID is nothing but the content ID and the value is about us. So this content ID is passed as an argument to this show function, which is in your page.js controller. So if you take a look at the code here, if I go for page.js, yeah. So page.js is basically a file under the controllers. Here you can see there's a function called show. And in this function, this CID value, which you are passing as an argument to the URL, this CID value is being used to fetch the content. And then further, this content is being manipulated and after that being rendered on the website. This complete flow we'll be talking about as part of when we'll be covering the code part. But the basic flow is we are able to understand with the help of URL. Now, again, going back to the content part. So the merchant tools content, as we already talked about, this content is specific to the website. So that's why it's part of your merchant tools. And in the content, we have libraries. So let's start with the libraries first. Okay, now on the library page, we can see we have 6 libraries which are imported by default when we did the signed import for site genesis and reference architecture. So we got these 6 libraries, 4 of them which are basically assigned to the, like these are the private libraries and were created as part of the website. And these are the 2 libraries which are the shared libraries. Now the difference between a private library and the shared library is, as the name itself says, these libraries are basically generated as private libraries when we created the website. And these are the libraries which are basically created manually, or so it could be possible that when you are hosting multiple websites and using the same sandbox. So in that case, what happens is if you want to share the content across different websites, you go with the shared library option. And here by default, you cannot see any option to create or update an existing library. So since this library is available across different websites, here you can see this same library is being assigned to different websites. So this is something which has to be done at the organizational level. Now, in order to do that, you have to just go to administration, and under the sites, you can see the content libraries option. As soon as you click on that, you see we have these 6 libraries here. So when we are creating initially a website, at that time, it gives you an option to create a private library for that. So that's why these 4 site libraries, site specific private libraries, these libraries are generated when we create the website. But if after that, if you want to create a new library, that will by default be a shared library. You can see the type shared is there. And you just need to provide the values like ID, name, description. You can also provide locale specific IDs and names and description and everything. So that's how the library is created. Now this library will be created as a shared library, and this will be visible across different websites. So that is the reason we are seeing these 2 shared libraries here. Now going back to what exactly the library is. Now library is something, as you can see, it is assigned to, now for instance, site genesis shared library is assigned to the site genesis website. So it is nothing but you can see it is a container which holds all the content that we are trying to display. be it your video, images, textual or CSS or any kind of content that we talk about. This is basically a container which keeps hold of all the content that we have in this particular library or we are displaying on the website. Now, if you go to this library, you'll see it has multiple folders. And here you can see this path merchant tools, content libraries, and this is basically a library which contains your different folders. Now, as we saw that this particular library is assigned to our site Genesis website. So if I go to merchant tools and click on the library folders, it will again take me to the same page. So basically this particular library has all these folders, and these folders internally will be having your assets. Now, to understand it more or in a better way, let's take a look at this diagram. So everything that we see on the website primarily comes from the assets. If we talk about the static content, that will be primarily coming from the assets. So asset is the only way to display the content on a website. Static content we are talking about right now. Now this asset, they could be multiple assets on the website. We are trying to display content across the website, so they could be different sections as well. Now, in order to make sure that we are able to organize the data in a way that it makes sense. So let's say as a merchandiser, because not a single merchandiser would be working, there would be a team of merchandisers who would be working on the website. Now, in order to make sure that the content asset that we have created, it is basically responsible for a specific section on a website, and anyone else who's taking a look at the content asset, they'll be able to understand. So in order to make sure that we are organizing the content in a way that it's easily it makes sense for others as well to know like which asset is responsible for which particular section. So Salesforce gives an a convenient option of providing that in a folder. In a folder, you can combine different kind of assets, and those assets basically will be responsible for rendering the content. Now, the way it works is you can have subfolders as well. So let's say my folder has some assets and my folder has subfolders as well. Now the subfolder in itself can have some assets. Now, as we can see, it has a subfolder with 2 assets. This is the subfolder is part of a folder which already has 2 different assets. Now everything, as we talked about, library is a bigger container. So library is something which keeps hold of all the content that we have, and in order to organize it, we use folders. Here you can see library has asset 5 and asset 6, and the rest of the assets in this library are being organized in form of folder and subfolders, and there could be many folders and many subfolders as well. Going back to the folders, here you can see we have this. So this is basically the primary about us folder, in which we have, these are the 5 different subfolders that we see, and this is the asset. So when we talk about displaying the content, let's take an example. If we go to the storefront and let's talk about let's go to the privacy policy. Yeah. So this section that we are seeing is basically, this is basically a content asset, and all the content that we are seeing on the website is the content asset content itself. So library and the folder are just you can see it's more of a way to organize things, but the actual content will always be visible with the asset values. Now, to understand which asset is being used and like what all properties we can update for this particular asset, we can do it via 2 ways. As we have already updated the URL, so it is more easy and more convenient for us to understand like which content is being rendered. So here you can see page controller show function, and this is the ID that we are passing. This is the content ID. So basically asset ID should be privacy-policy. The other way to do the same thing will be go to the toolkit and the content information. If you hover over the content, you'll see this edit content section. As soon as you click on this, you will land on the content asset page, and the ID should be privacy policy. This is the same ID that we are passing in the URL. So there's one way to render on the land on this particular asset. Other way would be go to merchant tools, content assets. Here you can see, so this is the list of all the assets that we have in the system, like for this particular library. Now search for privacy and policy. So there's the same asset that is being rendered. Okay, now this asset is nothing but, as we already talked about, content is always the data. So content can always be customized. Now this is nothing but, so the definition of content, like this particular content asset, is part of your database table. So if you go to administration, system object types, now we'll go to the content part here, and under the attribute definition we have different kind of definitions here. So if you want to customize this content asset, now let's say if I want to have any new attribute here, so that can be done by the customization into the system object content. Now we'll talk about that later, but let's take a look at what all information that we can update and what we have as part of the content asset. First thing that you're seeing here is an option to lock it. So it could be possible that multiple people are working on the same content asset, and in order to make sure that there's no conflict on the content updated, it has to be locked. So when, let's say if I want to update the change, the content of this asset, so I'll have to lock it. Now no one else would be able to do the same thing on this particular asset. Now if we scroll down, you see that this has a unique ID, it has a name, it has some description as well. Now this there are two different flags that we're seeing, online and searchable. Online makes sure that whatever content that you're creating, it is visible on the website or not. Now let's say if I just turn it off and apply it, and if I go back to the same page, I refresh the URL and it says page not found. The reason is the content that we are trying to access, it is not online. Now let's turn it back online again. The other section that we have is searchable flag. So basically the way search happens in Salesforce Commerce Cloud is, let's say if I go back to, let's refresh this. So by default it should be visible. Okay. Now the way it works, search works is whenever we are trying to enter any keywords here, it basically tries to fetch anything relevant to that keyword that you are entering. If it's relevant for products, let's say if you have entered t-shirts, okay, we don't have t-shirts, so let's go with shirt. So as soon as I type in shirt, it provides with all the suggestions that the system has, like it has different kind of shirts. Also it has different categories, dress shirt is in clothing, or it has some popular queries as well, like short sleeve search people must have been searching for. Now it could be possible as a user, when I'm trying to purchase a product, I'm not sure about the privacy policy or the return policy. Let's say if I want to return the product in future, how can I do that? So there could be multiple content pages, or there could be some embedded blogs as well on the website. And if as a user, if I want to search for that, I would be simply going like, if I want to return. So it gives you with different suggestions, like if you want to go through the change or cancellation of orders, if you want to know about the information about returns, if you want to go for the FAQ or the checkout information, that can be done. Now if I search for privacy policy here, as a user, I want to just check for like what is the privacy policy of the website, so I can see here. Now if I just turn it off, like searchable is off now. One more thing which is important is, as soon as you are making some changes in the content or some specific attribute for a product, so reindexing has to be run. So we'll have to go to the search indexes and rebuild all. What are search indexes and why do we need to rebuild them? We'll be talking about that as part of the search module when we'll be covering it. But just for now, let's understand that index is a way for the system to know that how data is managed and how quickly they can fetch it. Now the reindexing has been done. If I go here, so I already searched for privacy policy and it was providing with the suggestions. Now, if I'm searching for privacy policies, it's not giving me any suggestion because this content is not searchable anymore. Now turning back it to online and rebuilding the indexes. Next section that we have on the content is, here you can see it's the SEO support, like page title, description, keywords, URL. So this all information that we configure here is basically for making that content visible to the search engines as well. For instance, right now the page title has been configured as e-commerce solution on demand. If I go here, on the title of the page itself is again the same, e-commerce solution on demand and everything. But let's say if I just remove it and clear it out, in that case what happens is, the way Salesforce has written the code is, it basically searches for this, like priority is given to the page title which is configured in the content asset. If it doesn't find anything here, it basically defaults back to the normal values, right? If you check the title again, it's privacy policy. So the name of the page itself becomes the title. Okay. Now if I change to anything else, it will render the same on the website now. You can see the title has gone from privacy policy to test now. After that, we have sitemap attributes, like when we are generating the sitemap for the complete website, if you want this content to be included, how frequently this will be changed, and what will be the priority, that kind of attributes can be updated here. If we talk about the presentation of this particular asset, now just because this asset content is being displayed with the help of this page-show controller, so that way it is basically, if you go back to the code, here you can see the content gets fetched, and after that it is using this particular rendering template. But this is something which we get by default. But let's say if you want to update the way this is displayed on the website, in that case what you can do is you can create a separate rendering template, and that template can be configured here, a rendering template. So this here you will just have to provide the part of the template. And the way the system works is, it basically searches for any object template. So if you have configured any template in the content asset itself in the BM, it will try to fetch that. If there's nothing available, after that it defaults back to the content page. Similarly, the custom CSS file. So here you can see the body itself it's of type HTML, and it contains all the markup that we are displaying on this page. Well, let's say I want to format it. So right now the way it is formatted is in, like, it's in form of different paragraphs or different spacing and different font. You can see it's in bold and it's in the normal format. So that either way can be done by, like, you can directly update that in the body section here itself, or you can have a custom CSS file written for that. So right now you can see this is in form of H1, then the P, then H2 and everything. If you want to include the CSS file, CSS as well, that can be done, like inline CSS can be added to this HTML code. But if you want to keep the CSS file centralized, if you want to use the same formatting across different pages, that can be done via creating a single file and providing the path of the file here, and the same file will be used by this particular section. Now, if you see this custom CSS file, what happens if I click on the select? It basically takes me to the shared library. So when we talked about initially that the content can be of different type, it could be images, it could be your videos or textual format, or it could be CSS files as well. So at that time when we talked about CSS file, it's basically the file that we upload in this library, and this library basically provides you the CSS file as part of the content asset when we are trying to format the content that you have written in the body. So that is the centralized CSS file that we can update. How to do it, we'll be talking about that once we are done with the content asset. Apart from that, if you want to customize this content asset, and let's say we want to add some new attribute, that can be done as part of system object extension that we did talk about here, like under the administration system object, and you can create a new attribute that you want. and update the values directly under the content asset. Now, just to circle back on that, content asset is basically something which is responsible for displaying all the static data or static content on the website. To organize assets in a better way, we use folders. And everything, folders and assets are basically part of the library, which contains all sort of data. It could be visual in the sense your videos or images or CSS files or text that we are configuring in the content asset. Now, talking about, so we have already covered libraries, folders, and assets. Now, talking about the import export, basically when we talk about this kind of content which is configured by it could be we could be having a separate team doing the content part on a website. So the way it is done is basically a single sandbox is used, like the staging instance is used normally to create and update the content, and from staging it is replicated to development and production. Well, let's say for your system, if you want the data or whatever newly configured content is there on the staging instance, so that can be done via two ways. One is either you can directly export the complete site from staging and then import it into the local instance. The other way would be going to the import and export option on the content part. Now, if you go to the import and export, we'll see it basically asks you for which library you want to either you want to import or you want to export or you want to configure the data for any specific library. Now, let's say if we go to basically if I go to import export, it renders this section where you can upload the file. So let's say if I have the staging file, I can upload here and then after that import it by going to the import section. If I want to export existing library in my system, I'll just go to export and I'll export that particular library. And in order to manage the data, like the image specific data, or if I want to upload a new video, or if I want to upload a new image, or let's say if I want to upload a CSS file, in that case, I'll have to go to this manage content image section. Now let's say start with the manage content image section. Let's go to this. So you can see we have different libraries here. We have 4 private libraries and 2 shared libraries. And if I want to update the data for this site genesis shared library, let's say, so I have to select it. And after that, you can see it shows me with the directory here. Expanding it, you can see this. If I click on the CSS, we have this about the CSS file. It's a default CSS file. If I open it, you'll see the formatting as well. Okay, it's taking a little bit of time, but if you can download this file as well, and that way you can see the CSS content of this. So this is basically a centralized CSS file that you may use across different content pages if you want to keep the same formatting everywhere. Other section that we have is images, and under the images you can have like any number of subfolders created. So let's say if I talk about card specific images, so this is basically the image of a credit card showing the CVN number. Similarly, if I go to homepage, on the homepage we have different images in the banner, if you see, and we have the different section for the promotional images. Similarly, for if you go to any landing pages, let's say. So for test products, we have these 4 items. So basically, under the images, you can create as many folders as you want, and you can arrange your images. So it basically provides you a way to organize images in a better way that you can easily fetch them whenever needed as part of the content assets. Now, as these 4 sections we have already covered, now going back to the page designer. So page designers basically, as part of the reference architecture, it is an extension given and the business manager, which enables merchandisers to use to create a reusable components. So it basically requires support from the code part as well. We need to generate the reusable modules and reusable components, and those components can be further used by the merchandising teams. So right now, as part of the site genesis, we usually don't get this page designer section, but just to give you an overview of how it looks like and how we can do that. So let's say this is a normal home page that we have on the site genesis. Now, if we want, we can just divide this complete page in different modules. So the modules will be designed in a way like this particular section, we can call it a hero banner. Top one, we can call it a promo banner. After that, we have this section in which we have 3 different components, which are basically nothing but like rendering images in a different way. And after that, we have the footer section. So this complete page, if we want to divide, we can divide it in 5 different components. And these 5 different components, we can create modules for them. Now, let's say if down the line, if the merchandising team wants only these 3 modules, the like top banner, after that they want the hero banner, and post that they want the footer only, they don't want in this or they want a different module in this is instead of this particular module where we are showing 3 different images, they want let's say again same hero banner they want here as well. So before page designer, what used to happen was this has to be coded in the code, and like there was a dependency on the developer. But after page designer, what developer team does is they create flexible modules, like the hero banner itself will be in form of a module, and the same module, if the merchandiser wants, they can use it multiple times on the page. So that way it doesn't have any dependency on the developer, and it can be updated on the fly. But page designer is something which is heavily dependent on the code part, and creating flexible modules which can be used further by the merchandising team. It's something which is part of the page designer. We will consider it and we'll take a look at it when we'll be covering the code part. But as part of the content, the primary primarily important thing will be your libraries, library folders, and the content assets. And in that as well, content assets are very crucial, and that is the only responsible component of static content. So this pretty much covers up the content part of any e-commerce website. For the next video, we'll be considering products and catalogs, because customers is not a very complex one. The products and catalogs we'll be talking about in the next video. And about this video, if you have any questions or concerns, please let me know in the comments, or you can directly reach out to sfccqueries@gmail.com. Thank you.